Hello dear friends! Since we are living in France now, I thought it would be interesting to share with you a specialty of the culinary specialty of the region that we're living in, Nouvelle-Aquitaine, and specifically the culinary symbol of Bordeaux, a pastry that's called Canelé. This is an amazing dessert that every Bordelais likes to eat with their coffee. It's pretty fulfilling and very, very, very tasty. So I thought it would be nice to share with you this culinary opening, if you haven't heard about this, and paint it with watercolor. Before we start, I would like to explain a little bit how I drew the sketch. I did a quick sketch over here. It's very simple, but I'd like to explain first how I did it. So, if you look at Canelé, it's reminding you a form of cylinder. You have a small circle here, and you have a big circle over here as a base. So this is exactly what I used to help myself to draw the sketch. And if you draw a little circle and then without removing your hand from the paper, you continue drawing circles one after another and making them larger progressively, you'll reach the biggest circle in the bottom, which is the base of the Canelé. And then you just connect the two sides of Canelé and create a cylinder. A very basic form. Of course, it depends on perspective, on how you look at your little Canelé. If you look on it, flat lay, so like this, 90 degree, you will see a small circle. I drew it here, and you will see the outline of the bigger circle just around it. The distance between the small circle and the big circle is very, very, very short, because visually we have this distortion of the image that makes it look understandable to us. It changes it in our eyes and makes it shorter visually. This is how we understand and see perspective, and this is how we can draw it on a two-dimensional sheet on the paper. Then you can look at Canelé like this. If you look at it from the side, you might see only the, I would say, ribs, the ribs of the Canelé, and the top and the bottom line. Unless you move it a little bit like so, then you will see a tiny bit of the circle. The more you move Canelé, the bigger the opening of the circle will be. And this is how you can draw it on paper. Here I made a sketch of a pretty simplified sketch of Canelé, where I pointed out the inner part, this one, the soft part of Canelé, the outer part of Canelé, and the base. Then, to make it easier for me to understand, I decided to show every edge of the rib as a circle. So I drew a bunch of small circles, and I connected every circle with the base, with the bottom the biggest circle over here. So you see up, up, when we look at Canelé like this is how I see it sitting on my chair. The rib that is looking at me has the widest distance, and then because the shape of the cylinder is rounded, every other distance between the rib is getting shorter. This is very important to pay attention to because of the perspective. We can't make the distance between each rib, the same. It should get shorter and shorter and then essentially just disappear. Then in the bottom, it's very interesting. If you look at the bottom, you'll see kind of like a rounded or banded connecting line, which is not straight. It's not like this. It's bended like so. Connecting each side of Canelé together. And finally, on top over here, every tiny circle is going inside like this, and it reminds me of, I don't know, of a pyramid, little triangle, and connects us with the lightest area of Canelé, the heart of Canelé. On top of it, it's dark caramelized crust. It's amazing. It's crispy, it's a sweet, like caramel, and inside it's very soft. It's like a custard center, and all of it is flavored with rum and vanilla. It tastes really good. So speaking of colors, the custard, I will paint it with a mix of yellow and cadmium yellow and raw sienna to achieve some sort of brown color, but nice and soft, sunny brown. Then for the main base color of Canelé, I'll use burnt sienna. It's a nice warm brown color with mixed with indent trend to just cool it down, so it's not so bright, not so vivid, to achieve nice crispy feel of caramel. And for the darker shadows on the tips of our caramel, I'll use the mix of Van Dyke, it's a bit darker brown, with the same indent trend blue to achieve the darkest tone. Et voila, let's paint. My sketch is pretty dark, but I'm not worried about this time because the darkest area are going to be covered with my darkest brown tone. So the brown watercolor is going to cover the pencil line completely, and that's why I'm not worried that it's going to shine through my watercolor layers. So now we can finally start. I need some of my nice and sunny brown mix because I want to start with the lightest area of Canelé. Here I'm not really worried to cover more than I should, so I'm going inside as well, just a little bit, so that nice and sunny yellow is sort of shining through. The important part is that here in the middle, the area is nice, light and soft. Now I can take some of the burnt sienna and just go over it. Specifically in the area where there is still some water, some humidity. And as you can see, I'm not really covering everything completely. I'm sort of like locating some of the base areas, the important areas, leaving some places rather white, so you can see some of the white paper shining through. And now with my darker tone, burnt sienna with blue, I will carefully drop my shadows. And I'm doing it very carefully because I don't want the dark tone to float too far into the center of my Canelé. That part should be nice and tender. and gently I am creating the, as I call them, ribs, the side of Canelé with the darker tone. Make sure that your dark brown doesn't lean too much towards blue, because we added blue, so make sure that blue is not dominating. The darkest areas are the base of Canelé. And as my layers are getting dry, I need to reanimate it with water to make sure the colors are floating smoothly. Now, in certain areas, I'd like to add another orangey tone, especially here where I was saying that it looks more like a pyramid. It's going close to the heart of our Canelé. And over here I need to mark this connection between our Canelé crown. It does look like a crown a little bit. Now I need to let it dry and create the texture. Add the darkest tones and work on the texture of our Canelé. I'm just making sure that the color is thick enough. My burnt sienna in particular is thick enough so that when it gets dry, the color will get a bit dull as usual. The watercolor gets lighter, as you remember, so that now the brown color that is looking very exaggerated, it's gonna be less exaggerated but still brown, just like I need it. So the colors got dry and a bit lighter. And now we can work on the shapes and textures. I'll take Van Dyke, my darkest brown, add a bit of blue to make it more neutral and also darker. So we don't need to use black. And now I'd like to straighten out my sides, ribs of each side, each rib of the Canelé. If you know how to set it correctly, I'll really appreciate it. So I apply sharp stroke and immediately dilute it. Because the paper is dry now, the color doesn't flow freely as if it's wet. So it gives us more control, but also gives us more sharp strokes here. So to avoid the sharp strokes, we just need to work with semi-wet brush and essentially just add some water. Having water in your brush is going to help you dilute the pigment, dilute the sharp edge, and let it go into the direction that you need. Now here is important part, because here we only see the tip of our side of the rib. There's also a bit of shadow here on the opposite side. But essentially we just need to basically paint a line connecting top with the bottom, and this line should be the darkest one. It's the edge. It's this. Mix in more darker brown, and here again important, point out the tip. But of course we can't just leave it like this, so we are going to dilute it. The crispier the caramel is, the darker will be our brown color to portray it. But of course it's important to not go too far and just paint everything brown, dark brown, almost black. We need to keep it light and watercolory. And basically, the more water you have in your brush, the more it will allow colors to blend smoothly without leaving sharp lines and sharp edges. And basically now we just need to kind of show the most shadowed areas in our Canelé, which are the tips of the crown over here. Also, I left some of the space white so that the whiteness of the paper is kind of shining through. That gives us more of a feeling of like fresh dessert in food art. If you leave some of the areas white, showing the highlights, like if the light is dropping on the dessert, this will give it more of a feeling of like a nice and fresh and yummy dessert. Here I feel like the distance between the two edges are too far, so I'm just going to add one of the ribs here and also kind of add it a bit on the side. In perspective, you see it a little bit. Just like so. And now we need to paint the shadows. Pure water first. Bits of brown and blue. I'd rather add more blue into this so that the color is leaning towards black or gray. And just let it flow. The shadow is the darkest in the area where it's touching the subject. And it becomes lighter as it goes away from the viewer, from the subject. The edges must be soft, so I'm diluting them with the semi-wet brush. And add in a bit darker tone here at the bottom to represent the cast shadow better. You don't want it to go too far. And finally, I'd like to add some of those sparkling white areas that will bring the feeling of fresh and yummy canelé, which is a very typical thing to do when you paint food art. Showing the highlights more, like paying a better attention to highlights, making them stand out. And here we go. This is our canelé. Hope you enjoyed painting with me. You can download the outline of my painting of this particular canelé and use it for yourself. Trace it on paper and paint directly. It will be available in our Patreon. See you in the next tutorial.